I said get out of my hangar, old man. Captain Marcus Webb's voice echoed off the metal walls of Hangar 7, sharp and cutting like a blade. His finger jabbed toward the massive sliding doors, pointing the way out as if directing a stray dog. The old man didn't move. He stood beside the sleek Black Hawk helicopter, his weathered hand resting gently on the cold metal of its fuselage. He was 84 years old, his frame thin but unbowed, wearing a faded denim jacket that had seen better decades. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, remained fixed on the aircraft's rotor assembly. A small crowd of young crew chiefs and mechanics had stopped their work, watching the confrontation unfold with visible discomfort. The old man's silence only seemed to fuel the captain's anger. But what was about to be revealed would change everything. Captain Marcus Webb was not accustomed to being ignored. At 32, he was one of the youngest helicopter pilots to command a flight section at Fort Carson, and he wore that distinction like armor. His flight suit was always pressed, his boots always polished, his confidence always absolute. He had logged over 2,000 flight hours and had been decorated twice for missions in Afghanistan. In his mind, that made him untouchable. The old man had wandered into his hangar during the base's annual open house event. Webb had noticed him immediately, this gray-haired civilian in worn clothes, touching the aircraft without permission, running his hands along the tail boom as if he owned it. The sight had irritated him instantly. "Hey!" Webb had shouted, striding across the concrete floor. "This area is restricted, authorized personnel only." The old man had looked up slowly, his expression calm, almost serene. "Beautiful machine," he had said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "The UH-60. They've come a long way since my time." Webb had stopped a few feet away, his arms crossing over his chest. "Your time? What time would that be exactly? The Korean War?" He let out a short, mocking laugh, playing to the mechanics who had paused their work. The old man didn't respond to the insult. His hand continued to trace the helicopter's skin, stopping at a small access panel near the engine housing. "Transmission's running a little hot. You can tell by the discoloration here. Might want to have your crew check the oil cooler lines." The technical observation, delivered with casual authority, momentarily threw Webb off balance, but he recovered quickly, his smirk returning harder than before. "Oh, we've got ourselves an expert here, boys," he announced loudly. "Some random grandpa off the street is going to teach us how to maintain a Black Hawk." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the old man. "Listen, sir, I don't know who let you wander in here, but this is my hangar, my aircraft, and my operation. I don't need maintenance advice from someone who probably flew biplanes." A few of the younger mechanics chuckled nervously, though most shifted. Their weight uncomfortably. Staff Sergeant Elena Ruiz, the senior crew chief, watched with a furrowed brow. Something about the old man's bearing, the way he stood, the way he absorbed the captain's hostility without flinching, told her this wasn't just some confused visitor. The old man finally met Webb's eyes. There was no anger in his gaze, no offense taken. Just a deep, patient stillness that seemed to look right through the captain. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said quietly. "I was invited by the base commander to attend the open house. I wanted to see the helicopters." Webb's laugh was sharp and incredulous. "Invited by the base commander? Right. And I'm having dinner with the Secretary of Defense tonight." He pulled out his phone, waving it dismissively. "I can call security right now and have you escorted off this base. How would you like that?" "That won't be necessary," the old man said. "Then I suggest you turn around and walk back to wherever you came from. The public display area is outside. This hangar is for real pilots, people who actually know what they're doing." Webb's voice dripped with condescension. "Not for tourists looking for a photo op with military hardware they don't understand." The old man's gaze drifted past the captain, settling on a faded photograph mounted on the far wall of the hangar. It showed a Huey helicopter, its body riddled with bullet holes, hovering over a jungle clearing. The caption beneath it read, "In honor of Army aviation heritage." A shadow passed over the old man's face, a flicker of something ancient and profound. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, pressing against the fabric of his jacket where something lay hidden beneath. "I understand helicopters better than you might think, Captain," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But Webb wasn't listening. He had already turned to his crew, gesturing impatiently. "Someone get this man out of my hangar before I lose my patience completely." No one moved. The standoff had drawn more attention now. Word had spread through the hangar like wildfire, and mechanics from adjacent bays had drifted over to watch. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a palpable sense that something was very wrong about this situation. Staff Sergeant Ruiz stepped forward, her voice careful and measured. "Captain, maybe we should just let him look around. It's open house after all. He's not hurting anything." Webb whirled on her, his eyes flashing. "Did I ask for your opinion, Sergeant? I'm the officer in charge here. When I give an order, I expect it to be followed." He turned back to the old man, his patience exhausted. "Last chance, Grandpa. Walk out on your own, or I'll have MPs drag you out. Your choice." The old man looked at the young captain with something that might have been pity. "You remind me of someone I knew once," he said softly. "Young, talented, certain he knew everything there was to know about flying." He paused. "He learned differently. We all did." "Is that supposed to mean something to me?" Webb demanded. "Some kind of old man wisdom? Save it for your grandkids." He reached out and grabbed the old man's arm, his grip tight and aggressive. I said, "Move." It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. As Webb's hand closed around the old man's bicep, he felt it, a solidity beneath the worn jacket that didn't match the frail appearance. The arm was thin, yes, but it was corded with a strength that age had not entirely erased. And the old man's eyes, which had been so calm, so passive, suddenly hardened into something else entirely. Something that made Webb instinctively release his grip and take a step back. "Don't," the old man said, and though the word was quiet, it carried the weight of command, a tone that Webb, for all his arrogance, recognized on a primal level. The moment passed. The old man's expression softened again, returning to its previous serenity. But Webb had seen it, that flash of steel, and it had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. "Who are you?" Webb asked, his voice less certain now. Before the old man could answer, a young specialist named Torres, who had been watching from behind a tool cart, suddenly ducked away and pulled out his phone. He had seen something on the old man's jacket when Webb had grabbed him, something that had glinted beneath the collar. A ribbon, pale blue. Torres was only 22, but he had grown up in a military family, and his grandfather had served in Vietnam. He knew what that color meant. His hands trembling, he typed a rapid message to his friend in the base commander's office. "Sir, there's a situation in Hangar 7. Captain Webb is trying to throw out an elderly man. I think the man might be wearing the Medal of Honor. Please advise." He hit send, his heart pounding in his chest. Back at the helicopter, Webb had recovered his composure, though something in his demeanor had shifted. The absolute certainty was still there, but it was now tinged with a new emotion: doubt. "You still haven't answered my question," he said, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "Who are you? Why are you really here?" The old man looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly he reached up and unbuttoned the top of his jacket, revealing what lay beneath. Around his neck, hanging from a pale blue ribbon adorned with white stars, was a golden five-pointed star. The Medal of Honor, the highest award for valor that the United States could bestow. The silence that followed was absolute. Webb stared at the medal, his face draining of color. The golden star seemed to pulse in the hangar's fluorescent light, its weight far greater than its physical mass. He had seen the Medal of Honor before, but only in photographs, in museums, on the chests of men in history books. Never in person, never on a man he had just ordered to leave like a common vagrant. "That's," he started, but his voice failed him. The old man didn't speak. He didn't need to. The medal spoke for itself. Staff Sergeant Ruiz was the first to move. She snapped to attention, her hand rising in a crisp salute. One by one, the other mechanics followed, their tools clattering to the floor as they rendered honors to the man they had been watching be humiliated for the past 10 minutes. Webb stood frozen, his mind racing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake, some kind of costume or replica. People didn't just walk around wearing the Medal of Honor. There were only a handful of living recipients in the entire country. That can't be real," he said, grasping for any explanation that would salvage his pride. "Where did you get that? A surplus store?" The old man looked at him with those storm cloud eyes, and for the first time, there was a hint of sadness in them. "I got it from the President of the United States," he said quietly. "In 1969, for actions in the Ashau Valley." The words hit Webb like a physical blow. The Ashau Valley. Even he knew what that meant. It was one of the most dangerous and contested regions of the entire Vietnam War, a place where helicopters went to die, where rescue missions were considered suicide runs. Before Webb could respond, the hangar's main door burst open. A black sedan had pulled up outside, and from it emerged a figure that made every person in the hangar straighten involuntarily. Brigadier General Catherine Marshall, the base commander, strode into the hangar with purpose. She was a small woman, but she radiated an authority that filled the space around her. Behind her walked a colonel and two aides, their faces grim. General Marshall's eyes swept the scene, taking in the saluting mechanics, the pale-faced captain, and the old man standing quietly beside the Black Hawk. Her expression darkened as she pieced together what had happened. She walked directly to the old man, stopping 3 feet in front of him. Then, in a move that sent a shockwave through every person present, she executed a parade ground perfect salute. "Chief Warrant Officer William Thornton," she said, her voice ringing through the hangar. "It is the highest honor of my career to have you on my base, sir." The old man, Thornton, returned the salute with a slow, measured movement, his aged hand rising to his brow with the precision of decades of muscle memory. General Marshall held the salute for a long moment before dropping it. She then turned to face Captain Webb, and the look in her eyes could have cut through steel. "Captain," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, "would you like to explain to me why I received an urgent message that one of only 65 living Medal of Honor recipients was being harassed in my hangar?" Webb's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The general didn't wait for an answer. She turned to address the assembled crowd, her voice carrying the full weight of her command. "For those of you who don't know," she began, "you are standing in the presence of a legend. Chief Warrant Officer William Thornton, United States Army, retired. Call sign, Guardian." On March 12, 1968, then Warrant Officer Thornton flew his Huey helicopter into the A Shau Valley to extract a special forces team that had been ambushed and was facing annihilation. She paused, letting her words sink in. What makes this extraordinary is that 3 other helicopters had already been shot down attempting the same rescue. The valley was a kill zone. Every pilot in the region had been ordered to stand down. The mission was deemed impossible. But William Thornton hadn't listened to those orders. General Marshall continued, her voice filling the hangar like a eulogy and a celebration combined. "Warrant Officer Thornton volunteered for the mission alone. He flew his Huey through a wall of anti-aircraft fire so intense that witnesses described it as flying through rain. He took hits to his engine, his tail rotor, and his cockpit. A round struck him in the shoulder, but he kept flying." She gestured to the old man, who stood in silence, his eyes distant, lost in a memory that had never truly faded. When he reached the team, they were down to 7 men, surrounded by an enemy force of over 200. 3 of those 7 were critically wounded and couldn't walk. Any other pilot would have loaded who they could and left. Any other pilot would have been justified in doing so. Her voice hardened with emotion. But William Thornton made 4 trips. 4 separate trips into that valley, each time knowing his aircraft was more damaged than the last, each time knowing the enemy had zeroed in on his position. He flew with fuel leaking from a ruptured line, with hydraulics failing, with a helicopter that by all rights should have fallen out of the sky. She turned to look directly at Captain Webb. He saved all 7 men, every single one, and when he finally limped his helicopter back to base, the maintenance crew counted 237 bullet holes in the airframe. The aircraft was so damaged it had to be scrapped. They called it a miracle. They called him the Guardian. The mechanics and crew chiefs stood in stunned silence. Several had tears in their eyes. Torres, the young specialist who had sent the message, was openly weeping. General Marshall's expression softened as she turned back to Thornton. "Mr. Thornton, on behalf of this installation and everyone who serves here, I offer my deepest and most sincere apologies for the disgraceful treatment you received today." William Thornton shook his head slowly. "No apology needed, General. He didn't know." "That's precisely the problem," Marshall replied. "He should have known, not who you were specifically, but how to treat a fellow human being with basic dignity and respect." She looked at Webb again, her gaze unwavering. "Captain, you will report to my office at 0600 hours tomorrow in your service dress uniform. You will be prepared to explain your conduct today in exhaustive detail. You will also explain to me how an officer under my command could so thoroughly fail to embody the values we are sworn to uphold." Webb managed a strangled, "Yes, ma'am." But General Marshall wasn't finished. She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising. Let this be a lesson to every single person in this hangar. The man standing before you never sought recognition. He never told war stories to impress anyone. He never wore his medal in public until today, and I suspect he only did so because I asked him to for a private ceremony later this afternoon. He has spent the last 50 years living quietly, visiting schools, talking to veterans groups, asking for nothing in return. She pointed to the Black Hawk helicopter. This aircraft exists because of men like him. The tactics we use, the training we receive, the very concept of what is possible in a helicopter, all of it was built on the sacrifices of pilots like William Thornton. When you touch this machine, you are touching his legacy. As she spoke, Thornton's mind drifted back to that day in the Ashau Valley. He could smell the cordite, feel the shuddering of the airframe as rounds tore through metal and fiberglass. He could hear the screams of the wounded men he was loading onto his Huey, feel the hot blood soaking through his flight suit from the wound in his shoulder that he had ignored because there was no time to acknowledge pain. He remembered the face of the last man he had pulled aboard, a young sergeant barely 20 years old who had grabbed his arm and said through broken sobs, "I thought we were dead. I thought God had forgotten us. And then you came." Thornton had never forgotten those words. They had sustained him through decades of nightmares, through a lifetime of wondering if he had done enough, been enough. He looked at the young captain now, saw the shame and horror written across his face, and felt no anger. He felt only a profound weariness, and beneath it, something like hope. "General," he said quietly, "I'd like to say something to the captain, if I may." Marshall nodded. "Of course, sir." Thornton walked slowly toward Webb, each step deliberate. The captain looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, his earlier arrogance utterly destroyed. "Son," Thornton said, his voice gentle but firm, "look at me." Webb raised his eyes, and they were glistening. "I've been exactly where you are," Thornton continued. "Young, talented, convinced I had all the answers. I was cruel to people who didn't deserve it. I dismissed those I thought were beneath me." He paused. "It took a war to teach me differently. It took watching good men die to understand that rank and skill mean nothing if they're not paired with humility and compassion." He reached out and placed a weathered hand on the captain's shoulder. "You're a good pilot. I can tell by the way your crew responds to you, by the condition of your aircraft. But being a good pilot isn't enough. You have to be a good man. And that's harder. That takes work. That takes the willingness to look at yourself honestly and admit when you've failed." Webb's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry." Thornton nodded. "I know you are, and that's a start. That's always the start." The aftermath of that day in Hangar 7 rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. Captain Marcus Webb was not discharged or destroyed. General Marshall, after a long and difficult conversation with him, decided that dismissal would be a waste of potential. Instead, Webb was assigned to a special program, a 6-month rotation working with veteran outreach organizations, listening to the stories of men and women who had served in every conflict from Korea to Afghanistan. It changed him. The arrogance that had defined him was slowly, painfully sanded away, replaced by something more valuable, empathy. William Thornton attended the private ceremony that afternoon, where he was presented with a commemorative plaque honoring his service to Army aviation. He accepted it with quiet grace, thanked General Marshall, and then asked to be driven back to his small home an hour away. But the story didn't end there. 6 months later, Webb received orders to a new unit. On his first day, he found an envelope on his desk with no return address. Inside was a photograph, old and faded, showing a young warrant officer standing beside a bullet-riddled Huey helicopter, his shoulder wrapped in bloody bandages, a weary smile on his face. On the back, in a shaky but careful hand, was written, "To Captain Webb, remember the uniform doesn't make the man. The man makes the uniform. Fly safe, Guardian." Webb framed that photograph. It hung on his wall for the rest of his career, a reminder of the day he had learned what true valor looked like. Because in the end, valor doesn't shout. It doesn't demand recognition or respect. It simply acts. And sometimes it walks quietly into a hangar wearing a faded denim jacket, asking for nothing more than to touch the machines it once flew through hell.